from what I could tell, based on one of the few surveys that I could actually find, about 81% of people say that they want to start a book or they want to write a book sometime in their lifetime. Now, if that's accurate, that's a pretty high number. It's staggering when you consider about 300 million people in the country. You're looking at almost 400 million people in the country. So almost 300 million people that actually want to write a book. Now, I don't know how accurate that is, and the most recent data I could find was 2002, and I couldn't even track down the full survey. But it means a lot because there's a lot of people since I started writing that I have run into that have talked about how they had a book they had thought about. My best friend being one of them, who says he wants to write a book at some point. So it got me thinking, like, there's a lot of people out there that want to write a book, but there's not really as much information as there is. I don't think there's enough, like, straightforward, straight talk type of information out there. So maybe I should make something talking about it since I've, published 3 books now. So stick with me, and we're going to talk about how to publish a book and what all goes into that. All right, so I've got 3 books that I've published now over the past year and a half or so. And I want to show those real quick. just to give you guys an idea. So I've got the first book here, The Journal, and that came out in March of 2023. And that was my debut novel, right? Then I've got Legends and Tales, and this is a campfire kind of book. It's something that it's got 23 short horror stories in it that I wrote over the course of last summer, and then I released this in October of 2023. And then GPS Signal Lost, and this is the one that's upcoming currently. It's coming out April 26th. I've got everything done with it. I'm waiting on a couple of beta readers to get back with me. But for the most part, it's complete, right? So that's going to be coming out on April 26th. So that's 3 books under my belt. And back before I wrote my first one, I didn't have a clue what I was getting into. Prior to 2023, I was among that hypothetical 81%. I had wanted to write a book for years. I had even started some different ideas, some different story ideas, but I never really got very far into them. I would start writing and then I would get bored and walk away and forget about it, right? And that's been a thing since I was a teenager, basically. I wrote my first, probably what was my longest book until my debut novel came out. It wasn't even a full book. It was just a bunch of, it's very long for me as a teenager. But I wrote it all by hand. I don't even know where it went today, but it was something to do with monsters invading the world. And it was kind of sci-fi-ish, I guess, in a way. But I never got to actually finish a book. And according to these studies and according to these things, a lot of people won't even start writing. They'll say, I've got a story in my head. I got this idea for something, but they won't even get started. Now, I think that 81% has probably changed some over the years, especially because the industry, the publishing industry and that kind of stuff has changed dramatically. And there's a lot of people out there now that write fan fiction on websites, and they'll consider that a book. They'll write down what they'll write what they say is a book, and they'll put it out on Amazon without any editing, without any, that's kind of where we're at in the publishing industry, right? So you have traditionally published people, and those are your big publishers, or not even necessarily big publishers, but just companies that specialize in publishing that usually handle all of the costs associated with publishing. And they put the books out and they distribute them, and then they take most of the money, and then the writer gets a royalty, right? So that's traditionally published. And then now there's self-publishing, which I suppose you probably could have always self-published, but it was a lot harder 30 or 40 years ago than it is today, where if you want to self-publish a book, I mean, all you really got to do is upload it to Amazon. You write whatever you want, upload it to Amazon. The quality checks aren't really great. They just make sure that it's formatted properly and it doesn't include anything crazy, and they'll publish it. And that's kind of become a problem. But I digress. I need to get back to... So what I want to talk about to start with is where I started with GPS Signal Lost. Because that's my upcoming book, and that's the book that's most, I really feel like is the most relevant in all of this, right? because I learned stuff along the way the entire time. But with GPS signal loss, I feel like I finally got a really good handle on things. So that started for me as a story idea back in summer of 2023. So last summer. And I was like, I'm going to write this short story. I kind of like the feel of it. It was kind of cool. It was about a guy who he stops at a rest stop and he goes in the bathroom, he comes out, and nobody's there. And he finds himself all alone in the world. So I wrote this as a short horror story. And I got a good response on YouTube. I recorded it. I put it up on YouTube. I got a good response from it. A lot of people saying they wanted to hear more. So I was like, hey, cool. So I started writing more to it. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to make this into an actual full book. So that's where I kind of started focusing on getting writing. And realistically, when it comes to writing, I think the problem that most people run into is they don't continue. They don't ever get to the end. And there's multiple reasons for that, but I think the number one reason is probably it's not lack of desire to write, although there is a lot of that out there. I think an even higher reason is that it's hard to finish a book. It's hard to write the end. You can sit down, you can plan it out all day long, but at the end of the day, it's kind of, you end up with imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is feeling like no matter how good you are, no matter how much expertise you have in a subject, that you're just not good enough, right? So I think a lot of people, they get to what should be the end of the book and they either keep writing or they go back and they revise and they change things constantly as a delay mechanism to avoid taking the next step in the publishing process. And I think that's where a lot of people wind up getting hung up when they really get into writing. You can't do that though. If you want to publish, whether you're self-published or traditionally published, you have to really push yourself, and you have to know when to say it's complete. That was for me. I haven't really had that problem. Now, my anthology book with the short horror stories, that wasn't a problem at all because each of the short horror stories has an end, right? It has a logical conclusion. With the journal, that I had the idea in mind of where I was going with it. It was just getting there, and it felt weird to put the finishing touches on it because at the end you've gotten to know these characters as you've been writing, and it feels weird to say, okay, this is the end of the book. It's all done. And I found that with GPS Signal Lost too, because for one, it's shorter than my other books. When you're writing, you go off of word count, right? You don't go off a page count or chapter count because those things can vary. You go off a word count. To put it into perspective, GPS Signal Lost was a little over 40,000 words, which just barely qualifies it as a novel. The journal was about 55,000 words. Legends and Tales was about almost 60,000 words. And you can see the difference that makes in the width of the books as 5x8s. This is a 5x8 covers, and you can see the journal is much thinner than the other two books, which is partially why it was so hard to say, okay, this is the end. I have to stop it here. But on the other hand, you don't want to have too much, especially early on, especially if you're unproven as an author, if people don't really know you. It is hard for people to say, this is a brand new author to me. I'm going to pick up a book that's 300,000 words long, a really thick ass book. You're talking about the likes of like Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, or not Chamber of Secrets, Goblet of Fire, one of the thick books, right? Or any of the Lord of the Rings books. To sit down and say, this is the first time I've ever heard of this author, I'm going to pick up this long book. That's really hard to do. So if you want people to get to know you as an author, you want to start off a little bit shorter. And I've seen a lot of people, I follow a lot of authors and talk with them on Facebook. And I've seen people that are adamant about they want to hit 150,000, 200,000 words. That's super important to them. The higher the word count, it seems like for some people, and not everybody's this way, but for some people, it's like they see the higher word count as meaning better quality. And that's not really the case, because when it comes down to writing, sometimes less is more. And a skilled writer knows when to kind of end a scene or when to cut things out to make it succinct. You want to tell the story, but you don't want to over explain things. For instance, one of the things in GPS Signal Loss that I didn't do, and I haven't really done in any of my books, is I never described the main characters. And the reason for that is I want people, one, to kind of put their own thoughts on what they think the main character looks like in a way, but also I like the idea of people getting to know the characters through the story. A lot of books will start off with explaining what the main character looks like, explaining what different characters look like. They're this tall, they have this color hair, and that's not always necessarily needed. Especially if you're going to go over the course of the story and you want people to get to know your characters personally and deeply by their actions rather than telling them what it's about. And so that's where it can get for me, that's one of the things I cut out to kind of shorten stories. But there's a bunch of other things you can really pay attention to as you're telling the story. Unlike me with videos where I ramble on at times, you got to know when to cut it out, right? So moving forward with that, once you've finished your story, once you have completed the story, it's the first draft, right? And for me personally, I go through and I edit as I go. It takes me a little bit longer to do, but I will go back and reread each chapter to try and get everything just right. And then at the end of the story, I go back to the beginning and I start over and I read through it slowly, taking my time, and I do my own editing. And by the time I'm done with it, it's in pretty good shape. But that's because I have experience. I'm very detail oriented. If you're not so detail oriented, you're probably going to want to hire an editor. Now, those can be expensive. If you're traditionally published, it gets covered by the publishing house will cover the editor. If you're trying to go self-publish, though, and you aren't detail-oriented, you don't know much about English language as a whole. Not that you don't speak English, but if you don't know the ins and outs, the intricacies, if you aren't an English major, for instance, it can be very difficult to know how the language is supposed to work in writing to make it flow smoothly. And it can be hard to judge your own writing, too. So you're going to want to probably hire out an editor. That can be expensive, and there's different types of edits that you can do. We're not going to really get into those different types of edits because, honestly, I've never used editors for these things. I've done them all myself. I'll briefly mention there's line editing. There's editing for grammar. There's editing for punctuation. There's different types of things, and then there's the story editing and the looking at the arc overall and making sure you don't miss things. For instance, when I was going back and editing GPS Signal Lost, I found a mistake that I made with one of the characters, Steven, where I had mentioned his age in an earlier chapter, and then in a later chapter, I had actually kind of changed that. So I had to remedy those two things and make them work together, and so they would be the same thing. And also with the dates, I started the book out in the first edit saying that it was late June when Charlie, the main character, winds up in this situation. And it actually needed to be late July based on my dates. And the times, how I break the chapters up is by days. So for it to be where I wanted it to be at the end of the book, I had to actually make some changes to that. So there's little things and things you got to really pay attention to in the overall flow of the story as well. So that's at least 3 different editors typically. And you're looking at several $1,000s upwards of to get it done properly. And you can go on Fiverr and maybe hope that you get lucky with somebody that actually knows what they're doing. But realistically, to do a proper edit, you're going to be needing to pay quite a bit if you're getting it done. So if, let's say you get that done, or let's say you really know what you're doing, and you need to be, this is where you need to be honest with yourself, and where I feel like a lot of videos talking about this kind of thing, they don't say it straightforward, because realistically, when you start telling people, well, you shouldn't be confident in yourself, or you shouldn't be, it turns a lot of people off, because a lot of people will say, well, I'm qualified to do that. I know exactly what I'm doing. You need to be honest with yourself in this specific area. And the reason I say that is because there are too many people, there are too many books right now on Amazon, because it's so easy to upload, that are just not well written. I've gone through and read some of them. You get the free previews on I think it's Kindle Unlimited, something like that, whatever it is. The ebook stuff, the chapter by chapter releases. You get a free preview of the first couple of chapters typically. And I've sat down and I've started reading them. And some of them are just really not well written. They don't necessarily make a lot of sense. Some of them have some major punctuation errors, some grammar issues that it just doesn't read right. And that's because a lot of people, they don't want to use the money to get proper edits done. They just want to get a story out there. And for a lot of people, it's a get rich quick type of thing. They want to make as much money as quickly as possible. And writing's not for that. You know, if you don't have a good story, if your punctuation is bad, if your grammar is bad, it's going to throw a lot of people off. And the problem with that is that it then turns those people off to self-publishing in general. So if they see that somebody's self-published, they're less likely to want to pick that book up. It's a bad situation overall. So get the edits done. Either take the time to study and learn and perfect your craft as a writer so that you can pump out a book that would be technically a first draft that you've taken the time to really focus on, and it is more of a finished, polished novel, or pay somebody else to do it, or get traditionally published. One of those three things, but it is super important. The editing, it cannot be overstated how important the editing is in this entire process. Now, let's say you have written the book, you've gotten the editing done one way or the other, and you're like, okay, I'm confident now. I know where I'm going with this. You need a cover design. And that is the next challenging part that I've run into. It wasn't as challenging for me because I use my own photos. I use my own design. I have used Photoshop for years. So at this point, I've gotten pretty good at it. And I know what I want the covers to be. I know what I want them to look like. Just for my style, right? Now, let's say you aren't a design artist. Let's say you're not a photographer. You don't know how to use Photoshop. You just want to get a cover done. Now, there are free options on Amazon that you could technically use. The problem with those is they're very formulaic. They're very, you can go on Amazon and you can look at a lot of the books that are on there and see some very similar cover types. And that's typically because a lot of people use that system. They will go in and they'll say, just generate a cover for me. Oh, I like this one. Edit the details in it. And that's it. And while there's not anything inherently wrong in that, it is another thing that's going to kind of turn people away when they see your book and they're going to be like, oh, that's kind of generic. I think I've seen that title somewhere else. I've seen that cover design somewhere else. And there are people that will refuse to buy your book because they don't like the cover design. The cover is the face of your book. It is the piece of the book that tells people, hey, you need to read this. So it's super important between that and the black back blurb that we'll get to in just a minute. That's super important. So you have to make sure it's designed properly, that it looks good. You know, it doesn't have to be super artistic even necessarily. You need to have a style. You know, my book titles, my book covers for this and the journal are very simplistic title or covers, right? So if you look at the journal, if I can get all these books here, if you look at the journal, it's very simplistic. I took that photo. I have the journal sitting up there on my shelf that I took this photo of, you know. It gets a little bit more complicated when you do something like Legends and Tales. This isn't quite as simplistic, but that's because I used a photo. I wanted my youngest daughter, my middle child. She wants to be an artist when she grows up. And I thought it'd be kind of cool to have her help design the cover. So she did this, you know, the drawing of the design. I added in a photo of mine, like kind of merged them together and did some edits and some basic stuff in Photoshop. You know, you can see even on the back cover, there's part of the tree from the photo that I used for the top part. Like, that's all pieces that are in here. And it's something that I did. Not everybody can do. It's something that you might not be comfortable doing. And so you have to really consider once again, how you're going to get that done. And you can go the free route. If we're going to assume self-publishing, okay, because traditionally published, they cover all of this stuff typically. But self-published, like, you can either go the free route through having like a place like Amazon generate your cover, or you can design it yourself, which can be challenging if you don't know the tools. But hey, go learn the tools. It doesn't hurt to learn them, because these are all things you can use down the road in other ways. Or you can pay somebody. Paying somebody, you got to be very careful. Read whatever agreements you have with them to make sure that you are covered for licensing, because it's too easy for somebody to say, oh yeah, here's an image you can use for your cover, and then later sue you for using that image and not giving them a piece of the royalties if your book blows up, So you got to be careful and make sure you have the exact licensing to use it for a book cover, and that they don't expect anything in return. But that's the general gist of how you would get the cover. Then the back of the book blurb is the writing that goes on the back of the book. And the reason this says not for resale is these are two of these books I don't have any in stock right now. This and GPS Signal Lost, all I have is the proof copies. But you see on the back here, you can see some text, right? And that text is the back of the book blurb. That's when somebody picks up the book and they look at the back of the book and they see, what's this say? That's something that seems so simple, but it's actually can be very difficult to actually record, to actually write that back of the book blurb, because you finish the book and you're like, okay, now I got to tell in a short little paragraph what my book's about to get people, to entice people to want to read it, right? Without giving away any spoilers. And that can be incredibly challenging. It's something that it took me some time. I think I finally, with GPS Signal Lost, I kind of got a better grasp on it. But it can be really challenging to do just that short little spot, right? So let's say you got all of that done, right? And you've got to the point now where you're like, okay, I'm ready to publish. You're not ready to publish yet, because there's still, you got to make sure your book's formatted properly. If you're doing it yourself and uploading to Amazon, that can be a pain in the ass. I'm telling you right now, if you decide to publish through Amazon, formatting the first couple of times can be really difficult, because you got to get just the right margins. Depending on what program you're formatting in, it can be a nightmare. But if you guys want to see a full tutorial on that, I can do a full tutorial on it. It's just I hate doing it so much. That is the one part of self-publishing that I absolutely hate, is the formatting part. But it's super important to make sure that it looks good, to make sure that when people open it, they're seeing what they expect to see on the page. The margins have to be just right, so nothing's cut off. It's just, there's a lot involved with the formatting. So getting the book written, edited, cover design, formatting, book blurb, getting all of that done. The other major consideration that you have to make as a self-published author is how you're going to get your ISBNs. And your ISBNs, it is the number that is assigned to your book, typically by the publisher, to say, to kind of track the book through systems, right? It's the International Standard Book Number, I think is what it stands for, something like. I'll put it on the screen if it's something different than that, but I think it's International Standard Book Number. And it's a standard that can carry no matter where you sell the book, no matter where the copy's at, right? Now, there are a couple of different ways to get ISBNs if you're self-published. One being you can buy them. So I bought a couple years ago through a service called Bowker, which is the one that handles the ISBNs for the USA. I bought 10 ISBNs, and it was almost $300. But for those 10 ISBNs, I've assigned 3 of them to the journal. I assigned 1 to Legends and Tales. I'm getting ready to assign another one because I'm going to be releasing the ebook for Legends and Tales, and then 2 for GPS Signal Lost, because each version of the book has to have its own separate ISBN. So I had to have 1 for the paperback, 1 for the ebook, and then for the journal, I actually have a hardcover edition that is a special edition, and you need 1 for that. So you need to have an ISBN for each of those. If you don't want to pay for them and you're publishing through Amazon, you can actually get a free ISBN through Amazon. Now, the downside is the ISBN is tied to the publisher. So if you're self-published and you go through Amazon and you get a free ISBN, Amazon will be listed as the actual publisher in the international system. And while there's not necessarily anything wrong with that per se, it kind of takes away your flexibility, and those ISBNs are only available for Amazon. So if you decide to sell your books on any other platform, you need an ISBN through those platforms. Part of the reason that I did what I did with mine is because I have, there's a website called Draft to Digital where I have listed the journal, and I'm going to be listing my other ebooks as well, that I needed an ISBN for that website. And I figured, you know what, I'm just going to tie them all together. It gives me more ownership. It gives me more agency over my books and what happens with them. And I am listed as the publisher. So if you go search up the ISBNs, you'll find me listed as the publisher. Bearheart Photography, my company, is the publisher, right? So that's another important aspect to really think about when you are self-published. Now, with all of that, I didn't dive into too much detail on any one topic because this is kind of a broad overview, because I just feel like self-publishing in general is such a big topic. It's such a big thing. And I only really want to dive into the detail of it if there's a lot of interest in it, right? I typically go into things in a more overarching sort of way, cover things in a more general sort of way to be as user-friendly, as beginner-friendly as possible for a lot of this stuff. And I assume that if you clicked on this video, first of all, if you made it this far, like and subscribe. But if you made it if you clicked on this video, I assume that you are a new writer, that you haven't published anything yet. You're looking to learn how to do it. Maybe you have just started a book, or you're thinking about starting a book and you're curious as to the process, and I don't want to be digging into something or deep diving into something that just you don't need to be thinking about. Because honestly, if you're just thinking about starting a book, if you've just started writing your first chapter, you don't need to be thinking about all of this stuff right away. You need to be thinking about the story and the plot and the characters, and really making sure those things all jive, and making sure that they make sense. That is the most important part, is to get the book written in the first place. So that's why I don't go into detail on all of this stuff, because it's not that important until you get to the part where you are ready to start editing and you have a full book and you really want to get it published. And if you're at that point and you watch through this whole thing and you want to hear more in depth about what I went through and the things that I did, let me know in the comments down below. I'd be happy to kind of expand on any topic that people are interested in, because it's a big thing. And I've got some experience. I'm not an expert. I'm still learning as I go, but I did manage to get for GPS Signal Lost. I did manage to get the cover and the formatting right on the first attempt with Amazon this time, which that's a huge deal. If you've ever tried to upload to Amazon, that could be a pain in the ass. So I'm getting there. I'm working through it all. But I do want to thank you all for watching. I've got a Patreon. If you want to jump over to the Patreon, I share book stuff over there. I share videos ahead of time. I put names in videos. Like, there's all kinds of cool stuff over there. So you can go check out the Patreon if you want to do that. Otherwise, I will leave a puppy at the end of the video. It's become my thing. It's just leaving a puppy at the end of the video with some music. I'm enjoying the way that the videos play out. And I'm enjoying extending the videos, apparently. This is going to be a lot longer than most of my other videos. But again, thank you all for watching. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.